Perhaps this film will save someone's life. This incredible story, which began in 1977, shocked the world with its ending 34 years later. A young mother took her 6-month-old son shopping near their home, but she never returned. The police were unable to find any clues. Only after many years did we learn the truth, which shows that such complicated stories happen not only in movies. The case of Mark's Barnes. This story began in sunny Hawaii. At the beginning of 1977, a young couple, 26-year-old Mark Barnes and 31-year-old Charlotte Mariotti, welcomed their son, whom they named Marks. It seemed they had a happy future ahead, surrounded by palm trees, sunshine, and the endless ocean. Mark worked as a veterinarian, and Charlotte was an artist. Although they weren't married, they loved their child very much and tried to provide him with the best possible life. Before meeting Mark, Charlotte had been married once before and had a daughter who, after the divorce, went to live with her father in New Mexico. The mother stayed in contact with her daughter and visited her whenever she could. Now let's move to June 21, 1977. That day, Mark had been working in the yard since morning. After building a terrace, he was planting Charlotte's favorite flowers. Charlotte told him she wanted to go to the store. Not wanting to interrupt Mark's work, she decided to take their son with her. She put him in the stroller and left. Time passed, and Mark, absorbed in his work, didn't notice how long she had been gone. Charlotte should have been back long ago, as the store was only a few blocks away. After several hours, he decided to go out and look for her. As he walked away from the house, he saw his son's empty stroller standing by a bus stop. There was no sign of the child or Charlotte anywhere. Instead of reporting it to the police, Mark assumed that Charlotte had once again left for a few days without warning, as she had done several times before. However, this seemed quite odd. If Charlotte had left alone, it might have been understandable, but she had taken their 6-month-old baby with her, abandoned the stroller on the street, and seemingly vanished into thin air. 2 days passed, and she was still missing. Only then did Mark call the police. They advised him to wait a few more days, suggesting that she and the baby might return home. Mark followed their advice, but after another 2 days, he contacted the authorities again. This time, they asked him for a description of Charlotte and the baby and promised to start searching for them. Unfortunately, after that phone call, no one followed up with Mark, and the fate of his partner and son remained a mystery. 3 weeks later, Mark decided to go to the police station himself to ask about the progress of the investigation. There, he learned that no report had ever been filed from him. The officers claimed they had no record of Mark calling to report the disappearance. Naturally, no case had been opened, and all this time, no one had been looking for them. Let's pause here. Mark insisted that he had called the police twice, while the officers maintained that every report is logged, and there were simply no records of his calls. It's hard to tell who was telling the truth, but both scenarios are worth considering. If the police had indeed refused to start a search for a 6-month-old baby, this could have caused serious trouble for them. The disappearance of small children requires the police to take immediate action, even if only a few hours have passed since they went missing. For this reason, in this case, the officers may have deliberately concealed the fact that they had failed to take any steps to find the infant. The father's behavior also seemed strange. Why did he wait several days before calling the police? And whether he had even called the police at all? And even if he had, why did he wait another 3 weeks after those calls before visiting the police station in person? During all that time, he never contacted the authorities to ask about the progress of the investigation. During his conversation with detectives, Mark mentioned that Charlotte might have been struggling with mental health issues. In the 1970s, psychiatry was still developing, so Charlotte did not receive proper treatment. Neither she nor Mark decided to go to a hospital, even though there were serious reasons to do so. According to Mark, during the first few weeks after giving birth, Charlotte walked around the house with a blindfold over her eyes, unable to provide a rational explanation for this behavior. Due to the lack of a logical explanation, Mark became seriously worried and considered seeking medical help. At some point, however, Charlotte removed the blindfold and started acting completely normal again. Mark decided to forget about the incident and not give it much importance. Another sign that Charlotte's disappearance might have been related to her mental health issues was the fact that her daughter from her first marriage, who was 8 years old at the time, had been planning to fly to Hawaii in June to spend some time with her mother. Charlotte was eagerly awaiting this visit, but just before the trip, her ex-husband canceled all plans and announced that they would not be coming that summer. This deeply saddened Charlotte, and the strong negative emotions she experienced could have affected her mental state, even if she didn't usually show signs of instability. Unfortunately, none of these theories brought the police any closer to finding Charlotte and her son. The investigators opened a case, posted flyers around the area, but found no leads. Later, Mark claimed that for 1.5 years after Charlotte and their son's disappearance, he dedicated himself entirely to searching for them. He traveled across the island, hoping to find them alive and well, but his efforts were in vain. 2 years after their disappearance, he moved to California, and the police had little hope of solving the case, given the complete lack of evidence. The crucial time for starting the investigation had been wasted in the early days. 24 years passed. Mark had started a new family and had 2 daughters. He had long since stopped believing that he would ever see Charlotte and Mark's alive again. However, in 2001, the case took a new turn. Charlotte's daughter from her first marriage, Jennifer, flew to Hawaii and reported to the police station. She managed to persuade the investigators to reopen the case of her mother's disappearance. The detectives agreed. They entered information about Charlotte and Mark's into the missing persons database and created a computer-generated image of what Mark's might look like as an adult based on his childhood photo. The detectives first decided to question Mark because his behavior during the early stages of the investigation had raised doubts. In the old documents, there was no mention of him calling the police 2 days after Charlotte and the baby disappeared. The records showed that he only visited the station in person 3 weeks later. This led the detectives to suspect that Mark might have had something to do with their disappearance. Although 24 years had passed since those events, the investigators attempted to find witnesses who had lived near Mark and Charlotte's home at the time. Most residents had since moved away, but the detectives were lucky enough to find an elderly man who remembered those times. He told them that the couple often argued, and he had heard their shouting. The detectives believed they were close to solving the case and started to suspect that Mark was indeed guilty. Mark was summoned for questioning, during which he was informed about the witness who had overheard his frequent arguments with Charlotte. Mark admitted that they sometimes quarreled and joked, asking the detectives if they knew of any couple that never argued. Desperate to prove his guilt, the detectives suggested that he voluntarily take a polygraph test. The results turned out to be inconclusive. The specialist analyzing the readings could not definitively determine whether Mark was lying or telling the truth. As it turns out, the polygraph is an overrated tool. Many factors can influence the results. An innocent person who is stressed may be mistaken for a liar. In Mark's case, the test also yielded no results, so the detectives decided to approach the case from a different angle. They obtained a warrant to search the house where Charlotte and Mark had lived in 1977. They were particularly interested in the terrace that had been built just before the woman and child disappeared. The detectives hypothesized that Charlotte might not have left the house at all but had instead fallen victim to her husband during one of their arguments and been buried under the terrace. It remained unclear what they believed had happened to the baby or exactly how the events might have unfolded, but they had no other leads. Forensic specialists dug up the yard and examined the terrace, but they found no traces of human remains. It is unknown whether the homeowners received compensation for the 2 days of excavation on their property. The detectives admitted they had no further leads and once again shelved the case. They collected DNA samples from both Jennifer and Mark, hoping they might prove useful someday. The case remained in the archives for another 10 years. However, after that time, there was a breakthrough in this complicated story. 35-year-old Steve Carter from Philadelphia had been wondering about his past for as long as he could remember. He grew up in an orphanage and was adopted at the age of 4 by a wealthy couple from New Jersey. The adoptive parents, a U.S. Army officer and his wife, loved the boy and cared for him as their own child. Steve loved his adoptive parents as well, but he was always troubled by the question of how he ended up in the orphanage. In 2011, Steve came across an online article about the story of Carlina White, who had been abducted from a hospital at just 19 days old. Decades later, Carlina had been browsing websites with information about missing children when she found a childhood photo of herself. To her horror, she discovered that her current parents had kidnapped her from the hospital. Carlina's story inspired Steve Carter to search those same websites. He entered the details from his birth certificate into the search engine, and was speechless. The very first result showed an adult-age photo of him, created by graphic designers based on a childhood picture. The resemblance was so striking that Steve couldn't move for a moment in shock. He realized that he was none other than Mark Barnes, the boy who had gone missing in Hawaii along with his biological mother. Once he regained his composure, he decided to take a DNA test using a child search service. In the database were the DNA samples of Mark and Jennifer, collected by police 10 years earlier. After 8 months of waiting, the test confirmed a perfect match. Steve Carter was indeed Mark Barnes. The police immediately reopened the investigation. The missing infant had found himself after 34 years. However, the circumstances surrounding his disappearance still remained a mystery, but not for long. The key to solving the case lay in the birth certificate. First, the document had been issued only 1 year after the child's birth. Second, it listed a different name, Tenzin Amia, and the mother was recorded as someone named Jane. This allowed the police to connect two important threads in the case because that name had previously appeared in reports. Shortly after Charlotte and her child went missing, the police received an unusual report. A woman informed them that a young girl had knocked on her door, holding a baby in her arms and asking for milk to feed the child. When officers arrived at the scene, they concluded that the girl was in a state of extreme exhaustion and took her to a psychiatric hospital for evaluation, while the baby was placed in the care of social services. That girl was Charlotte. After spending a few days in the hospital, Charlotte secretly escaped, and no one ever saw her again. The child remained in state care because he had no birth certificate, and authorities were unable to identify his relatives. When the truth came to light, everyone asked the same question. Why didn't the police connect the disappearance of the woman and her child with that situation? Especially since the baby had ended up in the care of social services, could they really not understand that it was the same boy? Today, 34 years later, it's hard to answer that question. It's possible the police simply weren't aware of the earlier report since the two cases were handled by different precincts. At that time, Steve, who held a prestigious position and had his own family, decided to reach out to his half-sister and biological father. Both were shocked, and the man himself uncovered the mystery of his disappearance. No one had believed that the missing baby could still be alive. Although we still don't know what happened to Charlotte, the ending of this story can be considered a happy one. Sad statistics show that the chances of finding missing children after so many years are close to zero. However, Mark's case became one of the rare exceptions. He grew up in a loving family, received a good upbringing, and achieved success in life. Most likely, Charlotte truly suffered from severe mental health issues. She knocked on a stranger's door asking for milk for her son. It's possible that the call to the police saved the infant's life. Who knows how much Charlotte's mental state might have deteriorated in the future. To this day, no one knows what happened to her, and this mystery will likely never be solved. Considering that she never tried to contact her husband or find her son, she may have died not long after escaping from the hospital. Perhaps proper medical help could have changed her fate, and this entire story might never have happened. That's all for now. Share your thoughts in the comments, and don't forget to leave a thumbs up if you enjoyed the material. Take care of yourselves and your loved ones, stay safe.